It's the bird emergency and woohoo! It's World Albatross Day 2021. I'm Grant Williams. I'm just a bird nerd. We're rocking down memory lane today. The very first episode of the bird emergency featured my guest. My guest has a new role, but it's basically something she loves. And let me just break a secret. Before we went live, Steph told me she's much, much happier being where she is now than where she used to be. And that's because Dr. Stephanie Borelle is now working on the stuff she loves, seabirds, and we're going to talk about albatrosses. Kia ora, Steph, all the way over there in Aotearoa, which I always get wrong. Some people would call it New Zealand. How are you?
I'm really well. Really well. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Have you got your party hat out and everything for World Albatross Day 2021?
Oh man, I'm so ready. I've got a whole day planned. Albatross-shaped pancakes to begin with.
Now, do you actually have an albatross mold to make those pancakes, or are you just very skilled at pouring them out?
I'm just going to go freehand. We'll see how they turn out.
Fabulous. And for viewers of the video, my background is a beautiful photograph that Steph gave me last time we spoke. Steph, where was it taken?
It was taken on Campbell Islands down in the subantarctics of Aotearoa. Southern royal albatrosses. They're just such magnificent birds, the size of a small aeroplane when they're flying over your head.
Yeah. Pretty amazing. So I thank you for that. And I was able to get into the spirit today. So, Steph, World Albatross Day. How are you involved this year?
I'm the Marine and Pacific Regional Coordinator for Birdlife International, and part of my role is obviously raising awareness around albatross and the issues that affect them, particularly with bycatch and longline fisheries and things like that. So 22 albatrosses in the world, most of them are in pretty poor condition, and when we talk about the red list and a lot of the impacts and the reasons why they're declining and why they're being listed as endangered and threatened is because of bycatch and commercial fisheries.
Now, I pulled up the red list today, and 22 species, none of which doing any better than near threatened. Vulnerable is better, isn't it, than near threat?
Oh, the black-browed are least concern. So it's one out of the 22 species that is doing better than vulnerable.
Someone needs to update the list on the birdlife.org worldwide list.
Quite regularly, actually. I thought I had the most recent one. But
I've got black-browed albatross as endangered, same as Atlantic yellow-nosed and Indian yellow-nosed and black-footed and northern royal and sooty.
Yeah.
Controversy.
The controversy in bird taxonomy. What are you talking about, Grant?
Actually, before we pressed the go button and began celebrating albatrosses, I made the point to Steph that when I was a young lad, about half of these albatrosses didn't exist. It's amazing how many are being split out, and a lot of them have come out of, am I correct in saying the wandering albatross complex?
The wandering albatross complex. I love that term.
As against the complex wandering albatross.
There's also a medium-sized albatross, the mollymawks, and they've actually had quite a few splits as well. So in what they term the shy group of albatross, they've since split into Selvins, Chathams, and what was the other one? Selvins, Chathams, shy, which is the only Australian species. Yep. And that's because of the genetic differences. They're incredibly similar birds, but they actually forage in totally different parts of the world when they're, and then there's not a lot of overlap necessarily in their breeding stages as well. So those ones have been split recently. Still a bit of contention there for the American Bird Conservancy, American Ornithological Society, one of those American ones. I need to have another cup of coffee, I think.
Yeah. Is it important that they split this way? I often wonder, look, this is one of those things that will make me sound incredibly non-scientific, but when is a race a subspecies is a species? Is that the important thing, or is the important thing is just to make sure that they all exist?
I think that the way that we work in conservation is a triage approach. And so having these species split out and identified as individual species highlights the status of the population. So if you only have a small population, it means they're much closer to extinctions, which means they're much more of a conservation issue. And so in a way, splitting them out means that we can then go, okay, we have a small population on this island, they're incredibly threatened, they're their own species, and so therefore they will elicit more intervention and funding and things like that to be able to make sure that they don't go extinct. And yeah, so yes, I agree we need to save all of these birds, of course, because they're incredible. But I guess the benefit of splitting them means that we can highlight how important it is to save them, because they are a variety of different species, closely related or not.
Now, you mentioned that the shy albatross is endemic to Australia. Now, the other places where albatrosses, we say common, but occur more frequently are New Zealand. How many species regularly turning up in New Zealand, and any endemic?
We have 14 of 20. Well, okay, so this is
That's right. I thought we would go here because I spoke to somebody who, and out them, but they're a bit of a seabird fanatic like you, and they were telling me it was 17 species. So I was saying, okay, who am I to argue? Where do you stand?
In my present role, I must stand on the side of the BirdLife official position on the species.
22, but there are
24.
other standpoints. So 24 is being pushed for by some people, and there's the genetic work going on to strengthen the case for splitting them off. So what are the species that look like they're going to be further hacked into?
This Buller's albatross, Buller's toro, are a southern species and a northern species, and they do breed in different spaces. There is some temporal differences in when they breed, but still very they're very close related. And so there might be a split with those two groups at some point. I guess then there needs to be confirmation that there's no immigration or crossbreeding between those two populations, and then they can be split. Currently, they're not split by anyone formally. Maybe in New Zealand, it's sort of part of the discussion. And then I think there's also, you're putting me on the spot here.
I suppose part of it is to highlight that there are 4 genus of albatross, but like your other favourite kinds of birds, the petrels, they are unbelievably similar. And the genetic work is the only way that some of them are being split off. But there could be very distinct geographical, spatial differences between the populations. So
we also have to remember that evolution and speciation is an ongoing process. It's not, these birds have been evolving for millions of years, and the reason there are 24 species, 22 species, that they've been splitting because of those geographic barriers, because of those genetic barriers as well. So we're just observing that happening in real time, and that's a slow process, and now we have the tools to be able to really see how that happens. So I think that's a really interesting thing to think about when we talk about the splitting of these species.
And the other thing that I think about is that the isolation of certain populations might be entirely to us, to people, because as we talked about last time, and if people can go back to episode 1 with Steph, and then another one of the early episodes with Ben Sullivan, where we talked about hook pod, approximately, it's probably an underestimation, 300,000 seabirds a year are killed by fishing methods, and a large proportion of those are albatross, and that's all over the world. So by reducing the populations so drastically by our intervention, maybe we're causing this speciation.
Yeah, speciation takes generations. So we might be having an influence on it, but I wouldn't necessarily suggest that we're being a main control over it. Again, I'm not an expert in speciation and that sort of thing. But yeah, you're right that reducing these populations and restricting their breeding sites and isolating those breeding sites is definitely going to contribute to that process over time. And yeah, in New Zealand, for instance, albatross, the South Island particularly, to Waipounamu, had massive seabird colonies and albatrosses breeding on the mainland, which when people arrived, those populations are severely reduced. And then potentially that split between the southern and royal populations of the northern or the royal albatrosses, that could have contributed somewhat there as well. But yeah, I wouldn't be able to say for sure whether that was having an actual impact on the speciation of them.
And not only are we killing them with our long lines, New Zealand's a good example of this. You brought in all those lovely furry animals that people like to have in their backyards or as pets for their kids, and then they go, oh, the kids have left home. The kids have left home. I don't want these stoats anymore. Rats, mice. So we've been dropping them off in the history of naval exploration, seafaring, for it's probably millennia. Yeah, probably millennia.
Yeah, and Gulf Island is a really good example of that, which is about to be eradicated of mice. But the mice that arrived there with the explorers, the oceanic explorers hundreds of years ago, they evolved to be bigger and cannibalistic because there was very little food on the subantarctic islands. It's quite a harsh environment, obviously. And so they've just started eating albatross alive. And these become these big, giant mice, which are horrendously terrifying. And that was having a huge impact on the populations of birds there, of albatross there. So yeah, we're definitely doing a pretty good job of making it hard for albatross to thrive, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's how we have to talk about it, isn't it? That we have to exaggerate the positive and but also highlight the negative. At the Gulf Island project, you can tell us a bit about that shortly, but there's several successful projects like that, and I think Macquarie Island, that the Australian government and the Tasmanian government Antarctic Division have done a terrific job of eradicating the pests there. So tell us what is happening, has happened, and is planned to happen for Gulf Island. Actually, tell us about Gulf Island.
About Gulf Island. It's a South Atlantic, subantarctic island. It's very remote, far away from most people, settlements, communities, and it's a harsh place to live, but it's got huge numbers of seabirds on it, huge numbers of albatross breeding on it, and it had this invasion of house mice, which have thrived and evolved to become quite large and cannibalistic, as I said before. And they started out attacking the chicks of albatross when they were breeding. And then albatross are quite parental, and so they'll sit on their chick and make sure that it survives. They only lay once every year, maybe every 2 years, and some species even less often than that. And so they have a lot of investment into making sure that chick gets off the ground and can flee. And so they have this habit of just sitting on their nest, and that leaves them very, very, really vulnerable to these cannibalistic mice that have just started literally eating them alive. And you can Google the photos; they're just heartbreaking to see these beautiful birds being mauled. And so obviously it's not something that's we want to tolerate as conservationists, and we're responsible for bringing them to the island. And so there has been a long campaign to raise money to eradicate mice off the islands, and it's a really complex project. You need the right kind of baits. Subantarctic islands are quite different from our temperate islands in Aotearoa, where we've done a lot of predator eradication. The baits tend to dissolve in water, and so you can't have big rains and things like that. And you've got to get the right coverage, and you've got steep cliffs, and it's just a very difficult place to work. And so it was planned for last year to be the program, that helicopter bait drop on the island for last year, but obviously COVID interrupted that and everything got stalled, and then lost a lot of the money that had already gone into prepping that particular campaign. And so what's happened now is they've had to go back and restart again, but they're actually unloading currently and going through the process, and hopefully the campaign for the eradication will occur in the next couple of weeks, and that'll be successful, and we'll see a massive, hopefully a complete eradication of those mice from the island in time for some of the higher breeding periods for albatross and seabirds on Gulf. Yeah, and that's the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, RSPB, in the UK and the Gulf Island Trust.
Because that was going to be my next question, a point of clarification, which I should have asked you right at the start, but of course I'm a doofus. Who administers Gulf Island? Which government is responsible for Gough Island?
The UK it's a territory of the UK, uninhabited apart from research scientists and
Cannibalistic mice.
And cannibalistic mice.
Now, poisoning mice, that brings up some issues because where there are albatross, there's going to be skuas and our favourite friends, the giant petrels. And you don't want those birds that scavenge to pick up poison mice and have them for dinner or breakfast or lunch if they are going to in turn poison those birds.
Yeah.
So how much thought went into how to poison the mammalian pests, and do you know what poison was selected?
I don't. I assume that that's an anticoagulant style of poisons usually used for these types of campaigns. And you're right, there's by-kill from an eradication program. And that's been something I think that's always been thought about very carefully, or increasingly thought about very carefully when any of these projects go ahead. Obviously on smaller islands it's much easier to manage those by-killed impacts. And you mentioned Macquarie Island before. Again, that was another one that there was some lots of lessons were learned about how to deal with the by-kill of the bird species when you go through these projects and programs. And so every effort is taken to minimise that impact on those predatory or those scavenging type species. And generally what happens is population censuses, and there's a whole impact study done on how many individuals can be taken out of that population. Is that going to be worth it in terms of what the benefits are? So when you do these sort of projects, you have to understand there are trade-offs, and those are weighed really carefully to figure out what's the best way to proceed. And there will be some unfortunate by-kill of some species, but I think every effort is to make sure to minimise that as much as possible. The bait that is used is done at the lowest possible level to ensure that it actually can succeed, but also avoid those sort of issues. And then a lot of collection of carcasses and things like that will happen as well to avoid any scavenging species. And they do it's timed as well, so timed when there's the fewest amount of birds around. They do it in winter when there's not as much activity on the island. And those scavenger species will definitely be a lower density population because there's not as much food there for them either. So there's methods to avoid it as much as possible. Unfortunately, I can't say for certain there'll be 100% no by-kill of any species, but the trade-off is that we can save these albatross and other petrels and seabirds that are breeding there, and then those scavenger populations tend to rebound really quick.
Now, I mentioned an Australian example, the Macquarie Island example, and you're talking about Gough Island. Are you aware of any other sub-Antarctic islands that a similar eradication program has been undertaken on? And if yes, have you got any idea of how successful they are?
Yeah, so South Georgia has had a massive eradication program, and that's one of the largest, that'll be the largest probably sub-Antarctic island in the world. And that, fortunately, the way that the island is, the topography of the island is that there's these island sections where breeding colonies are that are separated by massive glacial systems. And so they're effectively islands within the island. And so they were able to eradicate before in those areas where the predators were established prior to them being able to move to other areas where they weren't already established. But there was a timeline on that because obviously climate change is changing those glacial systems, and so opening up the accessibility across the island. And that was a massive, massive project. But also, in terms of sub-Antarctic large islands, Campbell Island was another big one. There was a lot of, so hunters would do the cats and shoot a number of the different types of species or invasive species of the year, and then poison drop for Campbell Island. That was one of the earliest ones as well. So South Georgia, Campbell Island both had predator control or predator eradication successfully undertaken on. I know there's over 1,000 islands around the world that have had predator eradication on them. So there's a large number of them, and a lot of them are in the sort of temperate sub-Antarctic area one that is also being in the planning phases at the moment is Auckland Island, so subantarctic New Zealand, and that's where those shy albatross breed too, but they're restricted now to really inaccessible cliffs and things like that because of the pigs and the cats on the island, and rats, I think. So so there are examples of successful campaigns, and every time it happens we get better and better and better at it. So hopefully we'll get to a point where we run out of islands to do this too. But predators are pretty sneaky, and there's always a way for them to get back on ships or a wreck or something like that.
Pigs, cats, and rats. That's the triple threat, isn't it? That's terrible. When do you know when that program is due to start happening? And actually, before you answer that, what's the time frame in planning an eradication program like that? It's probably a 20-year start to finish operation.
Yeah, there's been control, and I got it wrong. Sorry, it's mice, not bats, but I can not quite. But yeah, it's huge amounts of planning and resources and money, and conservation is woefully underfunded, and these projects take a huge amount of resources to carry out, millions and millions of dollars. Gosh, I can't think of the number now, but I know it's just enormous amounts of money that you have to fundraise from the public or get from governments. But yeah, there's also all of these feasibility studies. How are you going to do it? Talking about islands that are in the Southern Ocean, faced with brutal winds, rocks get pushed up mountains in the subantarctic islands because the winds are so severe. There's a very small window of opportunity. They're very harsh environments for people, and so it takes a huge amount of planning and expertise to get it right. So yeah, decades in some cases. I think the Auckland Island eradication has been talked about for at least 20 years, 25 years, if not longer. And it's only recently that in the last 2 to 3 decades that we've actually sort of been able to develop the technology to be able to achieve those sort of things. And South Georgia was really a pivotal moment, I think, in eradication projects for those large islands that we can protect now.
Steph, for the audience that haven't met you before, have you been working down in the subantarctic?
I have done a trip down there as a guide I haven't done any research down there, unfortunately. But yeah, I have visited the Auckland Islands and Campbell Islands and the Snares and some of those beautiful subantarctic islands are just unbelievable. Never wanted to leave, to be quite honest. And there's an amazing research station down on Campbell Island that is just sitting there languishing. And if I was a millionaire, or billionaire actually probably, to go and restore it and set it up as a research station, that would be my dream.
So who's the richest person in New Zealand?
I don't pay attention to those sort of things, to be honest. Not me.
I was just going to publicly ask them to give you a lazy million.
Depends on how many citizenships we've given away to various individuals around the world.
Oh, boy.
It's another conversation.
While we're being political, hey, Australia's Minister for the Environment, there's a way to poison rodents without killing all the other birds. Okay, here's the message. Nobody could have seen that coming, as the magpies and the kookaburras and the birds of prey and the galahs drop out of the sky.
Yeah, it's pretty problematic. Obviously, it's a reactionary thing, and again, this comes back to the situation we're in with conservation. It's always a reactionary approach because we just don't invest enough money in valuing our environment and the services and all the things that they provide us. I was just thinking about this situations where we've eradicated islands in the Hauraki Gulf, just off the coast of Auckland, and that actually move weaker, which are, interestingly enough, predators of seabirds, seabird chicks, but and eggs, and they'll actually take them off the island because they would scavenge any rodent kill by kill, and so they'd move them off the island, then store them, wait for the island to be cleared, and then put them back on. So again, that's adding to the logistics and the costs around eradicating islands in a way that's environmentally friendly and cares for the other species in their ecosystem.
Now, dear listener, if you don't understand Kiwi, Weka is the Weka, the WEKA, which is a rail. Is it a rail? Yeah, so couldn't resist that to have a bit of fun.
You always got to have it at the old Kiwis, don't you?
Yeah, put it on the Barbie. Actually, let me go right off on a complete tangent because we're talking New Zealand, Kiwi, for a minute. Have you seen the new publicity photo for Crowded House?
I have not. I'm going to have to Google it now.
You will, because tell me Neil Finn is not a Doctor Who fan after you have a look at that.
Yeah, he always has been, right?
I don't know if he is, but
Was that he was in Split Ends, right? I mean, like those guys had some pretty amazing outfits.
Noel Crombie, what a man, what a designer. But anyway, all of our non-Australian Antipodean listeners are going to be going, just all right. I'll look. We're having fun. It's World Albatross Day, dear listener. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, go to YouTube and just Google or search Split Ends ENZ because of New Zealand, and I got you. And prepare to be amazed. Steph, Albert.
I'm dying to do a plug for the Albatross World Cup. It's been going on for the last 2 weeks. It's devastating to see what the species have been knocked out. And I have to take moments every day when I find out the results to calm myself down that Northern Royal got knocked out. Jesus.
And the World Albatross Cup has been happening on Twitter. Steph, and I hadn't seen it on Instagram, but I have been following it on Twitter. Steph has been putting the case for a contender. It's a player. It's a knockout one-on-one round.
It's not just me. There's a lot of help from the Albatross Task Force and BirdLife International, and the RSPB are also contributing to it and making some really great content.
I've tried to vote your way most of the time, but I haven't always lined up with your choices. But
I thought we were friends.
We're dear old friends. We're such old friends now, Steph, that we can disagree on significant issues.
That's true. It's true. But you should always vote for my Albatross.
I've tried to every time. I think there was only one that I didn't. And I think it was because you had basically up against a sort of tropical one, which I thought was pretty cute. So I think it was one of the brownie. I went for one of the brownie ones where you were one of the white ones.
Well, Albatrosses win on the day.
That's right. Everybody's a winner, and albatross conservation is the big winner.
Yeah, Steph, and so can I tell you about the quarterfinal? It's going to be, I've got to tell you, actually, sorry, the semi-final. The semi-final is going to be the grey-headed and the sooty albatross going off against each other.
That's a tough choice. That's a tough choice in a moment.
Okay. And then there's the Chatham albatross and the short-tailed albatross. Short-tailed live on volcanic islands and almost went extinct. That's a pretty hard one. But then Chatham, holy moly, what a great bird.
Actually, I know very little about the short-tailed, so maybe you can give us a rundown on that. But I do like its proper name, its Latin name, its scientific name, because it's almost fantastic. And
it's one of the few northern hemisphere species. So waved, Lasian, and short-tailed are 3 North Pacific albatross species. So it's pretty unique.
There's one of the questions I was going to pose to you. I'll drop this one in now. Do the northern hemisphere albatrosses breed in the cold Arctic?
That's a really good question. They're tropical. Yeah, they're tropical species. Waved.
Don't those albatrosses understand the way the world works?
Yeah.
There we go. That was
ridiculous. It's very confusing. Why aren't there more in the northern hemisphere is my question. It's because it's too hot. So probably to know. I think it's the subantarctic, that polar front, and the huge amounts of foraging opportunities down in the around Antarctica it's where you want to be if you're an albatross.
Also, northern hemisphere, polar bears, Arctic foxes and other foxes, weasels, stoats, martens, rats.
Yes.
Mongoose. Well, that they could be getting into the African albatrosses. Actually, are there any
invasive? Too many things.
Rapid fire, Steph. Albatrosses that breed in Africa. Who are they? What are they? Where are they?
Oh shit! Yeah, okay. Islands. No, why don't you tell me? Tell me, Grant.
I don't know, but I can tell you what.
I'm so New Zealand orientated.
But that's okay, because no one can be an expert on everything. But I've just consulted my best friend, Dr. Google, and Dr. Google definitively state, do you know why you didn't know the albatrosses that breed in Africa? Steph wins. Steph.
I was like, wait. China, Blake Proud. No, that's in South America. There's a few in South America.
16 species.
They're predominantly Pacific species. There's only a couple of Atlantic. There's an Indian yellow-nosed albatross.
16 species of albatrosses regularly fly to South African waters to feed.
Because you've got some of those good currents there. Cape Town, Cape Point, Cape of Good Hope.
Cape of Good Hope. And the other one is Cape Horn.
Yes.
You mentioned you've been to both of those in your other life as a tour guide.
In my other life on ships. Although no, actually I went to Cape of Good Hope during the World...
Not the World Rugby Cup. I jumped to another one of those New Zealand generalisations.
I'm not really a rugby fan. I think I'd rather go to the World Albatross, the World Seabird Conference.
I'd like to go to the World Seabird Conference. But hey, if anyone who is organising the World Seabird Conference would like me to come down and record all the guest speakers and the questions.
All definitely. Right, I'll talk to the organising committee.
I'm definitely up for that because I can record a panel discussion and all that. I do. Not for this podcast though. I do that for other podcasts. But, all right, Steph, back to random albatross questions. Is there albatrosses usually predominantly white, but is there a black one?
Yes, dark. There's the black-footed. There's sooties, but they're grey. Light mantled sooty is lighter, so you've got that transition. Yeah. Hang on, a waved albatross?
Black-footed, and and it must be tenuous. Let me go to our official list. Endangered. It's not tenuously holding on, but it breeds in Hawaii, in the Hawaiian Islands. And Hawaii has a tragic history of extinctions of their endemic species. So
New Zealand, which is pretty bad.
There's so many good albatrosses, Steph. There's so many good albatrosses. I'm going to leave this question till last. When I was a young fellow with my bird book and wishing I could see a wandering albatross just fly past, I was wondering. Can you tell that I lost my train of thought because I'd put the last question aside and it's come up?
You can do it. I believe it.
I can do it. Now, the question that I had momentarily forgotten was I had always thought that albatross were nomadic in their habits, but are they migrants? Let's sort that out. Or are some others, or are they residents? Let's sort out that.
Yeah, so most of them migrate during their non-breeding period. So Southern Ocean ones particularly, once they fledge, they'll go to sea and they'll stay at sea for some of the big albatrosses, like the wandering albatross or the royal albatrosses and Antipodean and things like that. They'll go to sea once they fledge for 10 years, maybe more. And they'll just literally fly around the oceans, figuring out
Now, let me stop you there. That's not in contention. But when they go to sea, when I use the term migrate, I think that they follow the same regular pathways like shearwaters do, or some of the shearwaters do, most of the shearwaters. So do we know whether the albatrosses take off after they fledge and they're off to sea? Are they just randomly spreading out across the Pacific or spending their 10 years on the wing in the roaring 40s and the 50s? Or are they just going, sunny day today, I think I'll go and have a look at Stewart Island? And they cross paths with a couple of their fledgling buddies and they go, we're going off to Chile. You want to come with us? You know?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so they don't necessarily follow the same pathways, but would go to the same areas. So when we look at tracking, and bear in mind we haven't tracked all of the albatross species really comprehensively in their non-breeding and their breeding times. Yeah, so and that's part of the differentiation, right, between some of these species that are being split, is that some of the shy albatrosses, so the Chatham albatross, will go across towards to South America, whereas the shy albatross in Tasmania will go towards the Indian Ocean and feed down that way and migrate. Like, they go and hang out in certain areas where they know that there's either instinctually have knowledge of the foraging areas and where they find food. So yeah, it's a great question, but some of them tend to stick around on the same islands without and around the same area, but they tend to go quite large distances. So but not necessarily in a track, if that makes sense. That's not on a regular migration pathway.
So some of them are basically residents. I think we've just worked that out, that they don't go far from their breeding area.
When you say far, I'm talking thousands of kilometers.
I was just about to make the point that it's relative, because when we're talking about a wandering albatross or a royal albatross, and we talk about they're just checking out their feeding grounds.
Yeah, and their feeding grounds are the whole Southern Ocean.
It's just 3/4 of the world, but
half the Pacific, most of the Pacific. And then, but I think the thing that is really critical there is that they come back to the same place to breed. And again, because their breeding cycles are quite long, like for the large albatrosses, almost a year and maybe even a little bit longer than a year to from chick laying or mating and with their partner to actually having a fledgling chick. And so there's a bit of a rolling overlap, but there's definitely times when they come back at the same time of year to do those sections of their reproductive cycle. And again, some of them will come back every year, some of them won't come back every year. They'll come back every couple of years, depending on how well they've fed and if they feel like breeding or if they haven't been caught by a fishing vessel.
Right, yes. We'll get there. We'll get there in a minute. I want to ask you a few more albatross questions that perhaps somebody who isn't that into albatrosses might think about asking. From the smallest albatross to the biggest albatross, how big?
Oh, so wandering albatrosses, the big albatrosses that are 3-meter wingspan. So huge, huge. Yeah, they weigh about 12 kilos, 14 kilos, the male sometimes. So they're pretty hefty birds. I guess if you think about your Christmas turkey, and maybe it's probably one of the largest ones you can get with feathers and a head, because usually they have heads and turkey doesn't have a head.
And before you tell me about the smallest one, I was just something came to mind. Steph, have you ever read any early explorers or seafarers journals where they've mentioned what albatrosses taste like?
I have, and people still eat. I've heard reports of albatross being eaten on fishing vessels. Fisher folk, fishermen, if they haul a bird alive, I've heard reports of them eating the albatross.
Now, fisher, listen carefully. Stop that now. That I can't. No. I don't care where you're from. I don't care what your customs are. Stop eating albatross, even if they are delicious like a roast turkey. Stop it.
I don't think they taste like a roast turkey. They're probably more like mutton bird and quite saline-y, briny, gamey, oily. Yeah, I've never tried one myself, so.
That reminds me of my joke about eating cockatoos. Do you
When
want to
did
hear that? I never have, but let's just go with it. Just go with it. Early settlers, right? There's a recipe. There's a tried and true recipe for eating cockatoos, for having cockatoos.
What is that putting up? Yeah.
Prepare it in the pot. Chop up your garlic, your onion, any other root vegetables or whatever you can find. If you want consistency of temperature when you're boiling a cockatoo, put in a couple of stones, boil for 3 hours, drain off, and eat the stones.
I knew you were going to say that, because they have a similar recipe here about the weka. Remember the weka that we were talking about before? As you cook it with an old leather boot, and then you cook it for a few hours, and then you eat the boot.
Yeah, it's good to see that dad jokes are alive and well on both sides of the Tasman. No, but look, seriously, fisher folk, I don't care if your traditions are that you've got to.
It's not so much traditions, to be honest. It's actually just when your crew and these boats are out in the ocean for a long time.
Yeah, for months, and not another tin of spaghetti. Oh my God, we've got an albatross in the net. Or, we've got an albatross on one of our illegal long lines.
Yeah, and they see albatross as a pest, or like they take their bait, and so there's obviously antagonism potentially there as well, and that's why we've seen mutilation of some species off the coast of South America as well.
Okay, we'll talk about that. No, we'll talk about that issue in a minute. But again, just a little message for fisher folk: hook pod. Hey, fellas, hook, okay? All right. World Albatross Day 2021. Ensuring albatross-friendly fisheries and fisher folk. But it followed on from last year. What was last year, Steph?
Last year was about invasive predators and protecting albatross from from cannibalistic mice.
Yes. Now the World Albatross Day is a celebration of the anniversary of the ratification, got to get the terminology exactly right, of the agreement on the conservation of albatrosses and petrels. So it really includes albatrosses, petrels, and shearwaters, that whole group. But we're only focusing on albatrosses because they're like the icon species, I guess. But are there any special activities for World Albatross Day that focus on your friends, the petrel?
It's World Albatross Day, so we kind of keep the focus, keep the spotlight on albatross. But I think you've just given me an idea to actually start a World Petrel Day.
And dear listener, if you have not met Steph before, I say this all the time, it's my running dad joke. The best Twitter handle on bird Twitter belongs to Steph. Steph, what is it?
Petrol Station.
Petrol Station. How good is that?
The petrol. Yes, my sister came up with that, actually. She's very smart.
And your sister takes a good photo because I think she took this one behind me. So I think that one's got Bell Borelle on the water.
Yeah, that's my name. That's my middle name.
Oh, jeez. So here's me thinking that you've got a smart sister called Annabelle, but it's just you in your split personality.
It's one of me.
Look, forgive us for rambling, but there's some fantastic pictures that Steph sent me last time we talked of Steph getting down with her hands in seabird burrows and whatnot. So very hands-on in her research. But how effective do you think last year's World Albatross Day in terms of raising awareness? How are you able to measure that? Or how do you, as a group, the task force and BirdLife International and all the subsidiary or allied bird groups who are taking part, how do you measure your impact on a day like World Albatross Day?
I guess for us, it's obviously how many impressions we get on social media and that sort of thing, and people talking about the issue. What our aim here is to really do is to highlight how incredible these birds are and how unique they are, and that they're disappearing from the seascape. And even though we don't see them on a daily basis, that they're a really incredibly important part of our lives, and that our activities like consuming fish can have a really serious impact on these birds. And so for us, it's really, in terms of measuring impact, it's about how many people we reach, how many people we can share the stories of the albatross with, and get them to care and get them to think about when they buy tuna from a supermarket or go out and eat, that they're asking the questions around where did this fish come from? Are you sure it's sustainably harvested? Are you sure that it hasn't got 10 albatross lives associated with it? And that's the thing, is that all of that tuna that goes into cans is labelled as dolphin friendly, but it's not seabird friendly. And we really need to get to a point, I think, where we acknowledge that this albatrosses and seabirds are being really adversely impacted by those activities, and we can do something about it. And consumers have a big role there as well. So raising attention to the issue, putting pressure on governments, putting pressure on your government to make sure you do things to improve the outcomes. Australia is a really good example of operating a tuna fishery with very minimal seabird albatross bycatch, because they use cameras on boats, highly regulated, and they're following the ACAP, the albatross, and oh god, now you're kind of struggling to remember it, but the agreement and best practices on reducing albatross bycatch and seabird bycatch in fisheries. So yeah, I guess that's our impact, is just trying to tell people and get them to care.
That raises a couple of things for me. The dolphin friendly move was, I think, spectacularly successful, and we've got the logo on those preferred brands in most major supermarkets, certainly in Australia and I think in New Zealand. Is that common to your knowledge worldwide? Like, are major supermarket chains in Africa, in Europe, in South America, in North America really marketing that dolphin friendly or that dolphin safe tuna?
I think it's a global accreditation. Whether there's enough attention on it anymore, maybe not. We're definitely working with, in Birdlife, a lot of our work is working alongside partners who have retail, like big retail partners in the US, like Walmart, things like that, who want to have sustainable fisheries sourced for their thousands of markets they have around the US and other places. And so working with them to make sure that they're asking the questions of their suppliers around seabird bycatch issues, and that would go along with dolphin friendly ones, and also integrating seabird bycatch mitigation practices into the MSC certification, so the marine certification system. You know what I mean?
Marine sustainability, I think.
There you go. Certification to make sure that those vessels that get certified are actually employing seabird bycatch mitigation measures, which are really simple and really easy to actually not catch birds if you do it properly.
And the dolphin logo, the dolphin friendly or dolphin safe logo, however we want to describe it, appears on the major brands, certainly here. I would have thought that a cartoonized, an iconic or logo kind of albatross would have been a no-brainer for putting on tins. Has there been any thought or any movement along that front so that people can visually be prompted to make a choice?
Yeah, and I think that's again part of those MSC accreditations, right? But we need to make sure and validate that those fisheries are actually doing what they say they're doing to be able to give them an albatross or anything like that. Yeah, there's lots of movement towards that. We're working really closely with the regional fisheries management organisations to make sure that they all have seabird bycatch mitigation measures as part of their management. So these are fisheries that are on high seas beyond national jurisdictions, and in those national jurisdictions, like in Australia, there's regulations around fisheries that operate there, so they already have to put in seabird bycatch mitigation. But on the high seas, there's work being done there to make sure that they are following those protocols and being certified and verifying that they actually are as part of the challenge that we face. So yeah, but I agree, having an albatross on a can would be wonderful to see, and hopefully that'll happen at some point soon.
So how do the worst fishing practices affect albatrosses? In what way are they? Well, do they become bycatch? Or you mentioned bill mutilation. What's the worst of the worst?
How do they, in terms of the fishery?
Yeah, like there's long lines, there's nets, there's how do I've mentioned hook pod earlier because we did an early episode about the development of hook pod, and let me just open my email. Very professional here. You can go to epo.org today. I think it's still open. European Inventor Award, and
Yeah.
Ben Kybel and Pete Kybel in the UK, who collaborated with Ben Sullivan on the design of HookPod. You can go and give them a vote, and they can win. They can win. My many tens of listeners can storm the website and crash it. Let's go. Bill mutilation. How often is an albatross caught on a hook and freed, but then unable to feed?
Most albatross will actually be killed by the hooking them in the first place. So albatross are surface feeders, so they plunge, dive and grab food at the surface of the ocean. And when a line, and these are long line vessels that have a lot of issues with albatross bycatch, when the line goes into the water, it's got a bait attached to it. And so they'll plunge on it and dive on it and try and get that nice delicious squid that's just floating at the top. And they get hooked, and then they get dragged underwater and they drown. The birds that come aboard live are being caught on the haul. So there's fish being pulled up onto the surface of the boat or onto the deck of the boat, and birds are grabbing the fish or the bait that's still on the line that hasn't got any target fish on it. And those ones are the ones that are caught alive. It's not as many as the ones that get caught on the way down. So, and it's hard to know in terms of numbers because we have very little observer coverage on board. The reporting is quite minimal. So was it released alive or was it caught alive? And then how much, and whether they can, depending on the damage in the unhooking process, then obviously if a bird's damaged quite badly, they'll just die. But the mutilation stuff is intentional. So birds are actually being caught and the top of their bills or their bills are being mutilated and cut off because they're seen as a problem for the fishermen to catch fish. And then they're released and they won't last very long because it's very difficult to feed when you've only got, imagine having your jaw cut off.
That's barbaric and to me completely illogical. That's like, I mean, that's worse than killing it and putting it in your pot for your dinner because you haven't had any fresh meat. That's just out and out cruelty and torture. Fisher folk, stop it.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue on so many levels, and that there's a lot of human rights abuses aboard these boats. People are in very dangerous conditions. Fishing is one of the most dangerous, pelagic fishing is one of the most dangerous industries in the world, and being an observer is even more dangerous. People get killed for being an observer on these fishing boats. And so you have to think about the fact that someone who is in a position like that, who's being treated very poorly, working very long hours, and has this threat of death at every point during their day, or almost every point during their day, and they see these birds and there becomes this culture of like these birds are just a pest, they're annoying, like they're slowing us down. I think it's easy for people to shift into that mutilation abuse type situation. Not saying that that's an excuse for it, absolutely not, but I think we need to appreciate that these situations are very, very complex and very, very difficult.
You have a much more generous soul than me, Steph, because that sounds to me like, oh, my big brother or my dad were mean to me. Let's go and stab the cat.
Yeah, there's no excuse for it, and it is a really terrible practice.
I can understand the competition these birds are competing with me. They're a threat to my livelihood. Okay, I can understand that might kill them, but hey, that should be humane if it's happening at all. It's wrong, but torture, no, that's just no.
Yeah, fishing is pretty torturous in itself, right? Like you're pulling an animal out of the ocean in a pretty gnarly way. Yeah, can argue what's the difference between killing an albatross and killing a fish. Obviously, for me, I think there is a difference, but at the same time, let's think about this objectively. Like if you're killing a fish in quite an aggressive way, there's no difference to doing that than to killing an albatross. And I don't think the people who are doing it have that delineation either.
So, dear listener, tell us what you think. Look, I can totally see where you're coming from, but you know, that's like saying when a vet euthanizes a horse because it's got a broken leg. Maybe we whack it with a mallet every half hour, come back and do it again until it's dead. That's not the same as administering the green drain. It's in our Antipodean and Tasman part of the world, it's not the same. Yeah, that I didn't know that was a common practice, that bill mutilation. I thought whenever I'd read about mutilation, I had thought that it was birds being hooked, they're still alive, and then I
wouldn't call it common. I think it's particular fisheries where the culture has developed and it's within a small like area of fisheries. But there is the threat it will expand as crew move around and go to different vessels and things like that. But it's a cultural problem and I don't mean like cultural in that way, I mean like a ship-based culture, like your work is definitely influencing that. But I wouldn't necessarily call it common to all fisheries. It's just the worst of the worst and the best, right?
That's right. And hopefully this is at the extreme end of the bell curve. No, that's terrible. Okay, so that was last year's was pest eradication. How much progress was made? We've talked about the issues and what needs to happen, but let's see, do we know, did any governments jump on board and start new eradication projects, or did they ramp up? Did any existing ones get ramped up or extended? How successful was the theme last year?
I think it was very successful, and there was an increase in donations to the Gulf Island restoration, which is obviously one of the big ones that was seeking funding and needed given the COVID situation. So yeah, I think it was very successful in that sense. In terms of governments doing the work, they're already aware of a lot of these issues in terms of the conservation departments and or ministries that deal with those issues. So we're at BirdLife, we're there to ensure that they're continuing to these projects as priorities and raising awareness as part of that. And also, again, in the background, working with governments and working multilaterally to make sure that projects are being prioritised when we know from the science that is being done where we need to go. So yeah, I think it's very successful. Anything that's a new fledgling is always going to make it's not going to have as big an impact as perhaps something that's been around for a long time. So I think over the years, as we increase World Albatross Day and more people hear about it, it will grow to be much more impactful. But I'm having fun doing it. So yeah.
Now we'll get to the fun bit in a minute. I'm hoping, Steph, to talk to the folk who have been working on Guadalupe with albatrosses there. Is that almost the most northern breeding location for albatrosses, do you think?
And actually, it's a good question.
It's probably pretty similar to Hawaii, isn't it? So
yeah, it's quite close to the equator.
Yeah,
I think the Japanese islands where short-tailed breed are probably the northernmost breeding site for albatross.
Okay, I might try and track down a graphic that might put some of those things to bed. I'd never really thought about it before, but then, there's so many seabirds, so many albatross in Australian waters and New Zealand waters that I certainly was, until recently, quite blind to where albatrosses were breeding. I just had that dumb assumption that they're all breeding somewhere down near the Antarctic.
Yeah, I mean, they're away from people, but definitely all over the place.
Except you tour guides who go chasing them.
Don't chase them. Look at them casually from a distance.
Yes. All right, let's get specific about World Albatross Day again today. There's two sort of ambassadors for the day. Who are they? Why were they selected, Steph?
The Tristan albatross is one of the, I guess, flagship species for World Albatross Day this year. I don't know why it was chosen, because it's an amazing bird and because it is facing huge issues in terms of seabird bycatch. It's critically endangered species that breeds in the southern Atlantic. Yeah, it's just an incredibly good flagship species that not many people know about, I think, as well. Beautiful colouring and lovely brown patchy type of species. And it's one of the great albatrosses, so it's a large one. And yeah.
Is it part of the Wandering Albatross complex?
It is part of the Wandering Albatross complex.
I love to sound like I know what I'm talking about.
And they're still facing issues with the mice, but definitely the flight fisheries.
And there's a really nice infographic that have been prepared by, I'm guessing, someone in the LB task force put them together. Would that be right, Steph? So whoever did them, it's a lovely piece of work. But the Tristan albatross, near endemic to Gough Island. So I guess that means this is where I was talking about the resident. We could categorise it as a resident. Doesn't stray too far, only a couple of 1,000 kilometres from Gough Island. Only 25,000 pairs. And remembering that they take a long time to reach sexual maturity or breeding age, that could only be a matter of several hundred pairs at any one time are actually nesting.
Yeah. And I think that a salient example of that situation exactly that you talk about is Antipodean albatross in Aotearoa that is declined 46% or something like that in the last 15 years. So half the breeding population's gone within a little more than a decade. And that's because when you take an adult out during breeding, you're actually taking out, you're killing the chick as well. So you're killing effectively two birds with one hook, but these birds are monogamous. So they perform lifelong, and sometimes they will remate, but get to a point where there's just not enough mates to choose from. And what we're seeing in the Antipodean albatross in Aotearoa is that there's more, all the females are being disproportionately impacted by fisheries, and so there's fewer females in the breeding population, and so we're finding male-to-male bonds, pair bonds, but obviously there's no breeding when you've got two males in the pair bond, and also there's just males that won't find a mate because there aren't enough females in the population to be able to mate with. And so once you get down to that sort of level, it starts to sink further and further towards what they call an extinction vortex, and you have such a small population that it's functionally extinct. So with the Antipodean albatross, we're talking about functionally extinct within 20 years, and that's pretty dire in terms of species extinctions. And so the same thing with the Tristan albatross. If we don't start doing something about the issues now, then those 2,500 pairs are heading pretty close to an extinction vortex now. So
a couple of the critical sort of statistics that are on the infographic. Yep. There's only a 20% breeding success rate for Tristan albatross. Now they're at risk at sea, but they're also at risk from the cannibalistic mice, the teenage mutant ninja mice, and only there's been a 28% decrease in the last 50 years, 46 years, according to the graphic. Now, gathering statistics for these birds is probably really hard. So we could be optimistic and say maybe there's a few more than we've estimated, but most likely there's less than we've estimated.
Yeah, these birds are fairly well studied on Gough Island. There's been a long-term research project there, tracking and population and demographic studies. So yeah, when you have that kind of decline in a population, it's pretty severe. And again, that's why this eradication on Gough Island is so critical to saving this species, because they're never gonna, when you have a 20% increase in the population against a net loss of adults that can breed, is never well.
Now, Steph, I'm quite a lot older than you, as my grizzly beard will attest, and my lovely greys that I'm covering up with my cap. I've watched a lot of documentaries in my time, wildlife films, many of them focusing on the Galapagos Islands. I don't think I've ever seen in any of those documentaries any of that marvellous wildlife footage from the Galapagos Islands. I don't think I've ever seen the waved albatross. Tell me about the waved albatross, Steph.
Yeah, so waved is one of those sort of subtropical species versus subantarctic species breeding on the Galapagos. They're heavily affected by the Peruvian fisheries, and so they feed on anchovies and things like that, and dale and squid, but they're also affected by invasive species, or that invasive species have been mostly removed from the island. They potentially will be increasing in terms of the sort of threats to them and population, but they are really heavily affected by fisheries bycatch, which would be...
And the population estimate is 9,600 pairs, breeding on one island in the Galapagos. But the situation that sometimes occurs that you do what you think is a good thing as a conservation measure, maybe for other species, but it has a detrimental effect on a sort of non-target species. Now, do you want to talk about what's happened on the Isla Española in the Galapagos?
Yeah, so summarize it for me.
Okay, one island in the Galapagos, and goats causing a huge problem, no doubt for all sorts of the residents of the Galapagos, maybe some of those amazing finches, or I don't know, an iguana, who knows. So they get rid of the feral goats. So what happens? The vegetation all comes back. So the vegetation all grows, lush, beautiful regrowth of vegetation. What happens then? The mosquitoes have got a brand new habitat and they all go crazy. Thank you very much. There's no more goats. So the mosquitoes come in. There's too much mosquitoes. When we alter all the beautiful web of life and the complex balances, mosquitoes are there, disease. The albatrosses don't like being overgrown. That all comes into a cataclysmic negative effect on the poor fellas. So 6% population decrease a year, apart from the fisheries issue that we've talked about, and apart from the males being disproportionately killed by our long lines that we're all out there eating our tuna and our mackerel and our whatever else that we all love so much. So that means the poor females can't find a fella. So it's terrible.
Yeah, it exemplifies why why the complexity around saving these birds is so many issues on land and at sea. And yeah, you have unintended outcomes from eradicating the goats that were eating the eggs and vegetation, and then avian malaria and climate change also impacting on that as well. So yeah, it's a really complex issue. These are all species. The reason that both of these species were chosen because they are critically endangered, which means they are on the edge of extinction. They're very close to that, and so highlighting them is really critically important to make sure that we can save them. Hence the Gough Island eradication and work being done in the Galapagos as well. So yeah,
it's heartbreaking to think how rapid the decline in the populations of albatrosses have been. We're pretty efficient at wiping out species when it comes to the industrial exploitation of resources and not looking at the adjunct effects, which is really awful. But the reason that the waved albatross, I think, is probably more at risk from my non-scientific layman's sort of view is that you have the Peruvian and Ecuadorian governments being the ones overseeing the fisheries rather than Australia, New Zealand, and perhaps South Africa, who are probably 20 years further advanced in their protection measures. Now, I'm not having a crack at Ecuador and Peru specifically, but I think Ecuador do a fantastic job about the Galapagos because it's really, really important as an economic asset for them with tourism. But do you know that their fisheries oversight is probably not as advanced as stringent as Australia and New Zealand? Am I making a fair point there?
There's a couple of things. So the Peruvian fisheries have decreased quite. Their effort has decreased quite a lot due to changes in I think it's the workers' rights laws and things like that. And COVID has really shut down a lot of those fisheries too. And so currently, at least, there's not as much effort going on in those areas. But yeah, they don't have probably as good oversight. They are still operating within the Regional Fisheries Management Organisation of the IATTC, the Southern American Tropical Tuna Commission, and I just use too many acronyms these days. I forget what they actually mean. And so they do have a responsibility to report on their seabird bycatch mitigation and also on their seabird bycatch that occurs during the fisheries. But yeah, I think there's a lot of countries that need to do better. I think Australia can do better. I think New Zealand can do better. So, it's a relative scale in terms of criticism.
Yeah. And look, the only time we can't do better is when there are no seabirds being killed by way of bycatch. When there's none, well done. Yeah. Until then, we've got to wait.
And that's the hard fight, is trying to convince these countries that it's important to save these birds.
Too right. Steph, I think we can almost go and throw on our party hats, and it's almost time for you to make your albatross pancakes. And actually, Steph, I want to see you post your albatross pancakes on Twitter, please.
I'll see what I can do.
That's the Albatross World Cup. Let's again.
Make sure you vote.
So to vote in the Albatross World Cup, you have to go to, that's Albi Task Force on
Albi, yeah, that's the place to go.
At Albi with a capital A and a capital T and a capital F, and it's Alby, ALBY, on Instagram at albatross_stories. So who has a poll today? What are we running to?
Yeah, so we've got the semi-final, which is the grey-headed albatross and the sooty albatross going head-to-head. Headed. There's lots of heads in there going head-to-head. And then we've got the Chatham albatross and the short-tailed albatross. So Aotearoa species, Chatham Island endemic, and the short-tail, which is that North Pacific species breeding in the Hawaiian Islands and in Japan. Grey-headed are both southern species as well.
So have you got a tip?
Because every time I go behind someone, it loses. So I'm not giving anyone any tips. I don't want to ruin it. It could be 25% chance.
Yeah. Is there a winner does a voter get a prize, or are you taking the winning albatross species out for dinner? Do they get a McHappy meal? Or?
Maybe a GPS track.
That would be good. Hey, richest man in New Zealand, it's time to, or richest woman in New Zealand, come on, let's get some GPS trackers as well as $1 million for Steph to go and spend 6 months. Which island?
I think Campbell would probably be, but I still haven't been to the Antipodes, so I'd love to go to the Antipodes Islands.
I thought you and I lived in the Antipodes already.
We do, but not the Antipodes Island.
Okay. Last question, I think, Steph. We'll wrap up a bit with what people can do apart from vote in the Albi World Cup. What's the best albatross, Steph? Question to what is your favourite? They're two different questions. What's the best albatross?
I can't answer that. They're just amazing birds. Albatross. It's hard to go past any of the wandering complex albatrosses. I don't know. I mean, I can't answer that question. I'm in love with all of them. I just think they're amazing.
Well, let's really anthropomorphize the albatrosses. What's the cutest albatross there?
Cutest? Probably the Antipodean.
Antipodean.
Yeah. Maybe short-tailed. They're pretty cute too. Blackfoot, actually, so are the Trista and Shide.
So a marginally different.
I do love bullers as well.
If I have to really put you on the spot, what's your favourite?
It's like having children. You don't have a favourite.
I was going to make that impossible choice for you there. Put the question, if there could only be one albatross left surviving in 2050, what should it be? But let's not go there, because that's never, ever, ever going to happen.
That would be devastating. It wouldn't be a world worth living in without albatross, in my opinion.
Actually, my last question was not my last question. So that people who aren't seabird albatross nuts, what's the role of the albatross in the sort of the food chain, the web of life, the trophic systems? Why are they so important, apart from just being bloody awesome?
They're important as providing nutrients for island ecosystems that then create biodiversity on the islands that they breed, and also the nearshore environment. So all of that nutrient runoff from their guano helps the productivity around islands and increase productivity there. They're also important. You talk about top predators, marine top predators. There has to be predators out there that are taking some of these meso predators out of the food chain, because otherwise you end up with this imbalance. And so albatross play a really critical role in that, maintaining balance within the environment. It's like if we didn't have sharks, then the system becomes unbalanced and it doesn't work. So albatross, like any species, are all critical components to ecosystems. And I think that's probably the point there, right? Like all species are critically important to a functioning, healthy ecosystem. And albatross are just bloody magnificent, really. So in addition to being an important part of the ecosystem, and they're captivating birds. Imagine being able to fly over the oceans for years and never land, and just, I mean, that sounds like a dream, right? To just the freedom.
Yeah, like that's the perfect way to take your bat and ball and go home, isn't it?
Yeah.
A reminder again, dear listener, Steph was my first guest on the very first Bird Emergency. So Steph took a punt on me. And in all that time, Steph, I've learnt nothing, because I've asked the very best and first question last. So thanks, dear listener, for sticking around. Do get involved. World Albatross Day is, funnily enough, it rolls around every year.
And it's the same hashtag every year. Hashtag World Albatross Day.
With the year appended on the end sometimes. That's right. That's right. Both. So if you are following the hashtags, follow them both.
And if you need to save some space in your tweets, you can use WAD.
That sounds like a really bad.
It depends on where you come from, I suppose.
That sounds like a white middle suburban rap group. That's the teenage rap group Vanilla Ice would have started, I believe. Oh, that's an image. That's an image you can never get out of your head. Really? Please go and vote for your favorite remaining albatross, even if your favorite albatross has been wiped out. Steph, donations. I don't often tout for contributions on the show, but the efforts to preserve albatrosses really need to be supported by dollars. So is there a sort of BirdLife repository fund that people can donate to, or should they be looking to their local government and their local conservation organisation for something local?
I think both. BirdLife puts a lot of effort towards making sure that we have albatross-friendly fisheries in those high seas environments. If you do have a local NGO or agency that's doing a lot of work on albatross, everyone always needs support in that aspect. Gough Island still needs support in terms of getting that predator eradication going. RSPB is always a good one. A lot of our donations are from individuals who join up to support on a regular basis, and we really appreciate that. We also take legacy, so if you want to leave us anything in the will that would go specifically to albatross projects, that's also another option if you really do love it and want to support the work.
And to do that, Steph, can they make contact through the BirdLife International website?
Yep. Anyway, you'll always find the right person if you want to give us money.
So that would be that's a hard one. New Zealand, have you got a BirdLife New Zealand?
We don't have BirdLife International is an umbrella agency, and we work with partners on the ground. Our partner in Aotearoa is Forest and Bird, so they appreciate any support that anyone can provide, obviously, in terms of financial assistance. And they do. We work quite closely together in terms of making sure that the albatross and the seabird bycatch issues in New Zealand are addressed and being taken seriously by the government. So, yeah, we work really closely together.
Steph, thanks. I'm thrilled that LB Task Force gave me you for this interview. When I reached out, I had no idea who I was going to be talking to about albatrosses, but hey, how good. You're now equal with all my repeat guests have been fantastic conservation women. So
it's a real honour it's always an honour to talk to you, Grant. I love it. It's great fun. And I appreciate all the work you do, bringing about awareness and information. Not just albatross, even though they are the best species, and you should always focus on albatross.
Thanks for saying that, Steph. So, dear listener, if you want to help the efforts that I do, the easiest way to do that is to share the podcast, tell your friends about it, and maybe go and leave me a review that says, "Oh, it's so good, the best guests," but I wish that bloke had shut up. So, Steph Borelle at Petrol Station, the best Twitter handle on the earth. What's your Instagram, Steph?
I only have time for one social media outlet. Wow. But I follow Albatross Stories. They're great. They do some really cool stuff.
Albatross Stories. Okay, I must confess I haven't been following Albatross Stories on Instagram. I have one post on Instagram, Steph. Guess what it is? It's that fantastic picture that you sent me, which is the cover that I've used for our first podcast of you with a petrel at night, or was it a Fulmar? It was a petrel, Wilson Storm Petrel, I think, from Whiteface Storm Petrel. Oh, I knew that, the grey one. And you've got your hard hat on with your light and everything. So yeah. Go and like.
Brilliant.
Before we let you go, what does your next 12 months look like in between World Albatross Days?
Preparing for the next World Albatross Day. It's a full-time job.
Wow. But what about the storm petrels? What about the quarters?
So basically most of my work now is doing fisheries bycatch work. So I'll be attending some of these regional fisheries management meetings, big multilateral meetings with lots of different countries, and making sure that they're following their own measures on seabird bycatch and trying to improve outcomes for seabirds and highlighting the impacts that fisheries have, but also the other threats. Also got some work in the Pacific that we're doing as well, which is very exciting. And I'll share that on social media when we get some stuff coming out. Wedge-tailed shearwaters, it's going to be great.
And when you said other threats, I thought you were about to that word that I always associate with you, Steph, that begins with P, but we haven't mentioned it yet, and that's plastic.
Yes. Wedge-tailed shearwater project is actually associated with plastic, so we're doing some work around that hasn't been done in the Pacific very much. So yeah, it's very exciting year. Hopefully we'll be able to travel a little bit, so I'll be able to go to the Pacific and do some of this work.
It would be terrible if I could no longer reference you whenever I do as the anti-plastic pollution warrior.
Still doing plastic pollution work, but more albatross and more petrels.
I can't express how happy I am that you were my guest today. Do follow Petrol Station on Twitter. Do go and check out the Albi Task Force. Do make a vote, and let's see who's the best albatross for this year.
Who's the best albatross for this year? And then if your albatross doesn't win this year, make sure you campaign for them next year, because we're going to do it again.
Absolutely, yeah. Pick a side. Actually, someone should design a set of 22 jerseys or guernseys or jumpers. How do you say that in New Zealand?
Jersey.
That's what I wanted you to say. Jersey. So thanks everyone. Bird emergency. Time to pop the crackers. World Albatross Day 20. Thanks, Steph.